The autumn rain painted the streets of Chicago in shades of silver and black, creating a mirror world where reflections danced beneath the streetlights. Isabella Russo stood at the window of her small art gallery, watching the water cascade down the glass, distorting the city beyond into something almost dreamlike. She'd always found comfort in the gallery after hours, when the voices of patrons faded and only the silent company of paintings remained. The space wasn't large, certainly not prestigious by Chicago standards, but it was hers. Every piece on these walls, every artist she'd championed, every choice in lighting and placement represented years of dedication to a craft she loved desperately. At 26, Bella had already lived several lifetimes' worth of responsibility. The gallery represented not just her dreams, but her survival, her independence, and most importantly, her ability to provide for Marco. Her younger brother was 22 now, technically an adult, but she couldn't shake the protective instinct that had defined her existence since their parents died in a car accident 8 years ago. She'd been 18, Marco only 14, and in one terrible moment, she transformed from carefree college student to guardian, parent, and sole family all at once. The memories of those early years still came to her in quiet moments like these. The legal battles with distant relatives who'd suddenly appeared wanting the modest inheritance. The nights she'd worked double shifts waitressing while taking online classes, checking on Marco between orders, making sure he did his homework, ate properly, stayed out of trouble. She'd sacrificed her own youth to give him stability, and for years, it had worked. Marco had graduated high school, started community college, seemed to be finding his way. She'd been so proud, so relieved that her sacrifices had meant something. Then 3 months ago, everything started changing. Marco became evasive, staying out late, avoiding her questions with the kind of defensive irritation that immediately triggered her worry. She'd recognized the signs because she'd raised him, knew every shift in his mood, every tell when he was hiding something. But she told herself she was being overprotective, that he was an adult now and needed space to make his own choices. She'd convinced herself that backing off was the right thing to do, that hovering would only push him away. Tonight, that illusion had shattered completely. Marco had shown up at the gallery just before closing, his face pale and eyes hollow with a fear that made Bella's stomach drop before he'd even spoken. The confession had tumbled out in broken sentences, words tripping over each other in his panic. Gambling. He'd started with friendly poker games, nothing serious, just blowing off steam with guys from his construction job. But the games had gotten bigger, the stakes higher, and Marco had convinced himself he could win back his losses. Instead, the hole had deepened, swallowing him bit by bit until he owed money to people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. $200,000. The number had hit Bella like a physical blow. $200,000 to men whose names Marco whispered with genuine terror. The Moretti family. Even Bella, who'd carefully kept herself removed from the darker elements of Chicago's underworld, knew that name. Everyone did. The Morettis weren't just criminals. They were an institution, a shadow government that operated in plain sight, their influence reaching into every corner of the city from construction to politics to law enforcement itself. Marco had left an hour ago, after Bella promised she'd find a way to fix this, though she had no idea how. She'd sent him home, needing time alone to think, to breathe, to figure out what possible solution existed for a debt that size to people that dangerous. Her savings account held barely $15,000. The gallery, while doing better each year, couldn't produce that kind of money. She had no assets to leverage, no rich relatives to call, no options that didn't end in complete disaster. The knock on the gallery's front door made her jump, heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. She turned from the window, squinting through the darkness at two figures standing outside. Large men, both wearing dark suits despite the rain, their build suggesting they spent significant time in gyms and significant time using that strength for purposes that had nothing to do with fitness. One of them raised his hand and knocked again, patient but insistent. Bella's hands trembled as she approached the door, every instinct screaming at her to run, hide, pretend she wasn't here. But she knew with cold certainty that running would accomplish nothing. If these men wanted to find her, they would. If they were here, it was because someone had sent them, and that someone didn't make requests that could be ignored. She unlocked the door, pulling it open just enough to look out. "We're closed," she said, hating how her voice shook slightly. The taller of the two men, distinguished-looking with silver threading through his dark hair, offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Isabella Russo?" His voice was cultured, educated, at odds with what she expected from mob enforcers. "Who's asking?" She tried to sound confident, in control, but suspected she failed miserably. "My name is Vincent Costa. My employer would like to speak with you this evening." It concerns a matter of mutual interest. He gestured toward a black sedan parked at the curb, engine running, windows too dark to see inside. And if I refuse? Bella asked, though she already knew the answer. Vincent's expression remained pleasant, almost sympathetic. Miss Russo, I think we both know that declining this invitation would be unwise. My employer is not a patient man, but he is a reasonable one. He wishes to discuss your brother's situation. Surely you want to explore all possible solutions? The mention of Marco made her decision. Whatever awaited her in that car, whoever this employer was, they held her brother's fate in their hands. She couldn't afford to antagonize them, couldn't risk Marco paying for her pride or fear. Let me get my coat, she said quietly. The drive through Chicago's rain-slicked streets felt surreal, like watching her own life from outside her body. Vincent sat in the front passenger seat while his companion drove in silence. Neither man spoke to her or each other, the only sound the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers and the muffled patter of rain on metal and glass. Bella tried to track where they were going, but her sense of direction blurred in the darkness and weather. They pulled up to a restaurant she recognized by reputation if not experience. Davino's was the kind of establishment where reservations required weeks of advance notice and entrees cost more than her monthly grocery budget. The building was elegant old-world style, all dark wood and brass fixtures and the kind of understated luxury that whispered old money and older power. A valet immediately appeared to take the car while Vincent opened her door, offering his hand to help her out. This way, Miss Russo, he said, guiding her not to the main entrance but around the side to a private door. They entered directly into a hallway lined with paintings that Bella's trained eye immediately recognized as originals, museum-quality pieces that should have been behind security glass and alarm systems. Vincent led her to a door at the end of the hall, knocked twice, then opened it and gestured for her to enter. The private dining room was intimate, a single table set for two with candles flickering in crystal holders. Wine glasses caught the light, expensive china gleamed against dark tablecloth, and everything about the setting spoke of careful attention to detail. But Bella barely registered the room's elegance because her entire focus had narrowed to the man who rose from his seat as she entered. Dante Moretti was younger than she'd expected, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair styled with casual precision and features that would have been handsome if not for the cold calculation in his dark eyes. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, tailored perfectly to a frame that suggested both gym dedication and the kind of physical confidence that came from knowing exactly how dangerous he was. But it was his presence that truly struck her, the way he commanded the space without effort, radiating a quiet authority that made very clear who held power in this room. Miss Russo, he said, his voice deep and smooth. Thank you for joining me. Please sit. It was phrased as invitation but carried the weight of command. Bella remained standing, chin lifted despite her trembling hands. I'd prefer to stand, Mr. Moretti. One corner of his mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. As you wish, though I think you'll find this conversation easier if we're both comfortable. He gestured to Vincent, who'd remained by the door. Vinny, give us privacy. Vincent nodded and withdrew, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to seal Bella into this moment, this fate, this impossible situation she couldn't escape. Dante returned to his seat, pouring wine into both glasses with unhurried grace. Your brother owes me a considerable sum of money, he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. $200,000 accumulated over the past 3 months through some truly unfortunate gambling decisions. Marco is young, Bella said, forcing herself to meet Dante's gaze. He made mistakes, but he's not a criminal. He's just in over his head, Dante finished. Yes, that much is obvious. The question is what happens next. He took a sip of wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. Typically, when someone owes me money they cannot pay, there are standard procedures. Unpleasant ones. Your brother would have approximately 2 weeks to produce the full amount plus interest, before consequences became severe. Fear clenched Bella's chest. Please, there has to be another way. I can pay you back, it will take time but I promise. At your gallery's current revenue? Dante interrupted. Even if you gave me every dollar you earn for the next decade, assuming generous growth projections, you'd still fall short. And I'm not a bank, Miss Russo. I don't offer 10-year payment plans. He set down his wine glass, leaning forward slightly. However, I am a businessman, and I'm always interested in alternative arrangements that serve my interests while resolving problems like your brother's debt. What kind of arrangement? Bella asked warily. Dante studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes assessing in a way that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, like he could see through every defense she'd ever constructed. "I have need of someone with your particular qualities. You're educated, cultured, knowledgeable about art and society. You're beautiful but not ostentatious, sophisticated but approachable. Most importantly, you have no connections to my world, which makes you valuable in ways you don't yet understand." "I don't understand at all," Bella admitted. "I'm expanding certain business interests that require a more legitimate public face," Dante explained. "There are social events, charity functions, gallery openings, business dinners where having the right companion makes a significant difference in how I'm perceived. You would attend these events with me, help me navigate the legitimate world of art collectors, philanthropists, and business leaders who prefer to pretend men like me don't exist even as they benefit from what we provide." Bella felt her stomach drop. "You want me to be what, exactly?" "Your escort." "I want you to be my companion," Dante corrected, his tone sharpening slightly. "There's a difference. You would appear with me at public functions, engage in conversation, help me establish credibility in circles that would normally exclude me. Nothing you do would compromise your dignity or safety. You have my word that any physical relationship would only occur if and when you chose it, not as obligation or expectation. And in exchange, Marco's debt disappears?" It sounded too simple, too easy, which meant it couldn't possibly be either of those things. "In exchange, Marco's debt is forgiven after 6 months of satisfactory arrangement," Dante clarified. "Additionally, I ensure his protection. No one associated with me will threaten him, and should anyone else try, they'll discover very quickly why that's a mistake. After 6 months, assuming you've fulfilled the terms of our agreement, you're free to walk away. Your brother's debt is wiped clean, and neither of you need ever speak to me again." Bella's mind raced, trying to find the trap, the hidden cost, the inevitable disaster lurking behind his reasonable words. "Why me? There are thousands of women in Chicago who'd jump at the chance to be seen with you, who already know your world." "Precisely why I don't want them," Dante replied. "I need someone genuine, someone who isn't performing a role they've practiced their entire life. Your reluctance is actually an asset, Miss Russo. You'll be believable because you'll be real. And your lack of connections to organized crime means no one can claim you're simply another mob princess playing dress-up." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to grab Marco and run as far from Chicago as their limited resources would take them. But she wasn't stupid or naive enough to believe that was an option. Men like Dante Moretti didn't make offers you could simply decline. And more than that, she thought about Marco's terrified face, his tears as he'd confessed his mistakes, his desperate plea for her to help him. She'd spent 8 years protecting him, sacrificing for him, building a life where he could be safe. How could she abandon him now when he needed her most? 6 months, she said finally. "After that, we're completely free? No strings, no future obligations." "You have my word," Dante said. "Which, despite what you may believe about men in my position, means something. I keep my promises, Miss Russo. All of them." There was something in his eyes as he said it, a flicker of something almost like honesty, that made Bella want to believe him despite every rational thought screaming that she was making a terrible mistake. "I want it in writing," she said. "A contract specifying exactly what you're asking and what you're promising in return." Dante smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from coldly handsome to genuinely attractive. "I respect that. Vincent will have something drawn up by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, we should discuss logistics. You'll need appropriate clothing for the events we'll attend, and I assume you'll want to continue running your gallery?" "The gallery isn't negotiable," Bella said firmly. "I have obligations, artists who depend on me." "I wouldn't ask you to abandon your life," Dante replied. "Your work at the gallery actually enhances your value to me. It establishes your credentials, proves you're a legitimate art professional rather than simply my paid companion. We'll work around your schedule when possible." They spent the next hour discussing details that felt increasingly surreal. Dante explained he'd provide a clothing stipend because the events they'd attend required designer labels and expensive accessories she couldn't afford. He outlined a typical schedule, noting that some weeks would require multiple appearances while others might need nothing. He answered her questions with surprising patience, never making her feel stupid for asking, treating the entire negotiation with a professionalism that caught her off guard. Finally, Vincent knocked and entered, informing Dante that another appointment required his attention. Dante stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Vincent will drive you home. He'll also provide you with a phone number where you can reach either him or me at any time, day or night. If you have concerns, questions, or if anyone threatens you, you call immediately." "Understood." Bella nodded, exhausted by the emotional whiplash of the evening. As Vincent moved to escort her out, Dante called her name. She turned back to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Let them watch," he said softly. "At these events, people will stare, whisper, speculate about who you are and why you're with me. Let them watch. Let them talk. They'll learn soon enough that you belong to me, and that means you're untouchable." The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her, should have confirmed every fear about what she was agreeing to. Instead, hearing the promise of protection woven through his statement, Bella felt something unexpected flutter in her chest. Not quite trust, but perhaps the first fragile seed of it, the acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, Dante Moretti was more complex than the monster she'd expected to meet. The drive home gave her too much time to think, to second-guess, to panic about what she'd just agreed to. But when she arrived at her small apartment to find Marco waiting on her doorstep, tears streaming down his face as he apologized over and over for ruining her life, Bella pulled him into a hug and told him everything would be okay. She'd made her choice. She'd signed away 6 months of her life to save her brother. Now she just had to survive whatever came next. The contract arrived the next afternoon via courier, exactly as Dante promised. Bella read through every word 3 times, consulted with a lawyer friend who specialized in contract law, and found nothing predatory or deceptive in the terms. It specified her obligations clearly: attend social functions with Dante Moretti as requested, typically 2 to 3 times per week. Behave in a manner befitting his companion, which the contract defined as engaging in polite conversation and presenting a positive image, nothing more. In exchange, Marco's debt would be marked satisfied after 6 months, with no residual obligation to anyone in the Moretti organization. She signed it in her apartment alone, her hand shaking only slightly as she wrote her name. The moment she finished, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Welcome to the arrangement, Miss Russo. Our first event is Saturday evening. Vincent will collect you at 7. Formal attire. DM." Saturday arrived too quickly. Vincent appeared at her door at precisely 7 o'clock, looking distinguished in a tuxedo, and escorted her to the waiting car where Dante sat in the back seat, devastating informal wear that emphasized his dark good looks. He looked her over as she slid into the seat beside him, his expression unreadable. "You look beautiful," he said finally, and something in his tone made her think he genuinely meant it rather than offering empty flattery. Bella smoothed her dress nervously, a simple black gown she'd borrowed from a friend because even with Dante's stipend, she hadn't had time to shop for something appropriate. "Thank you. Where exactly are we going?" "The Whitmore Foundation Gala," Dante replied. "It's one of Chicago's premier charity events, raises money for children's hospitals. Half the city's elite will be there, which makes it the perfect venue for our first public appearance together." The gala was everything Bella expected and more. The venue was spectacular, a historic hotel ballroom decorated with enough flowers to stock a florist for a month. Women glittered in jewels that could fund small countries while men in expensive tuxedos discussed business deals and political campaigns. A string quartet played classical music as servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that were tiny sculptures of culinary art. The moment Bella entered on Dante's arm, she felt the attention shift toward them like a physical wave. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. Eyes tracked their movement across the room with barely concealed curiosity and speculation. She forced herself to keep her chin up, to smile politely, to pretend she belonged in this world of wealth and power even though she'd never felt more out of place in her life. Dante seemed completely at ease, introducing her to an endless stream of people whose names and faces blurred together. Business leaders, politicians, judges, socialites, all greeting Dante with varying degrees of warmth that didn't quite mask their wariness. He was a predator moving among prey who couldn't decide if his presence represented danger or opportunity, and Bella realized with uncomfortable clarity that her role was to soften those sharp edges, to make him seem less threatening by proximity to someone so obviously normal. She was discussing Renaissance portraiture with a museum curator, genuinely engaged in conversation about brush techniques, when a man approached Dante with the swagger of someone who'd had too much champagne and not enough sense. He was younger, perhaps late 20s, with the entitled bearing of inherited wealth and no consequences. "Moretti," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume to attract attention from nearby groups. "I see you've upgraded from the usual arm candy. This one almost looks respectable. How much is he paying you, sweetheart?" The insult hit Bella like a slap, heat flooding her face. Before she could formulate a response, she felt Dante's hand settle on the small of her back, a gentle touch that somehow conveyed both support and warning. Bennett, Dante said, his voice dropping to a tone that made several people nearby suddenly find reasons to step back. You're going to apologize to the lady? Now. Something in Dante's expression, in the way he held himself with such controlled stillness, made Bennett's alcohol-fueled bravado crumble. I didn't mean anything by it. Sorry. Not to me, Dante said quietly. To her. Bennett turned to Bella, no longer meeting her eyes. I apologize. That was inappropriate. Bella nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to speak. Bennett retreated quickly, and the small crowd that had gathered suddenly found other places to be. Dante's hand remained on her back, steady and reassuring. Are you all right? He asked, leaning close enough that his words were for her alone. I'm fine, she managed, though her hands were shaking slightly. Does that happen often? People testing boundaries? Dante's jaw tightened. More than I'd like. But word spreads quickly. After tonight, everyone will know that disrespecting you means answering to me personally. It won't happen again. And it didn't. For the rest of the evening, people treated Bella with careful politeness, genuine interest even, as if Dante's defense had transformed her from curiosity into someone worthy of respect. She found herself relaxing incrementally, actually enjoying conversations about art and culture with people who shared her interests. Dante stayed close but not suffocating, his presence a constant reminder that she was protected but not possessed. They left the gala after midnight, Bella's feet aching from heels and her face tired from smiling, but oddly satisfied by how the evening had gone. In the car, Dante poured them both water from a bottle in the console. You did well tonight, he said. Better than I expected, honestly. Several people commented on how genuine you seemed. Genuine is pretty much all I can manage, Bella replied. I don't know how to be anything else. Good, Dante said, turning to look at her in the dim light of passing streetlights. Don't change that. It's what makes this work. Over the following weeks, their arrangement fell into a pattern. Dante would text her about upcoming events, Vincent would collect her, and she'd spend evenings navigating the strange world where Chicago's legitimate society intersected with its criminal underbelly. She met politicians who accepted campaign contributions from Dante's associates, business leaders who turned blind eyes to money laundering through legitimate investments, socialites who thrived on the danger of flirting with powerful men like Dante while maintaining plausible deniability about what that power actually meant. But she also began seeing dimensions to Dante himself that complicated her initial impression of him as simply a monster in expensive suits. She noticed how he quietly ensured elderly guests had chairs, how he made generous donations to charities without seeking public recognition, how his eyes softened when children approached him at family-friendly events. She learned he had a younger sister named Sophia who he clearly adored, and that his mother had died when he was young, leaving him to be raised by a father he rarely mentioned but whose influence had shaped Dante into the complex man before her. One evening, after a gallery opening where Dante had surprised her by actually understanding the contemporary pieces on display, they lingered in the car outside her apartment. Rain drummed on the roof, creating a cocoon of sound and privacy. Can I ask you something? Bella said, emboldened by wine and the strange intimacy of the moment. You can always ask, Dante replied. I may not always answer, but you can ask. Why did you really choose me for this arrangement? There has to be more to it than just needing someone genuine. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful in the dashboard lights. My father used to say that power without legitimacy is just violence wearing nice clothes. He spent his entire life trying to move our family toward legitimate business, to build something that could last beyond intimidation and fear. He died before he could finish what he started, and I inherited complications. This isn't about making myself look respectable, Isabella. It's about actually becoming respectable, building the foundation he wanted for our family. You represent that possibility. The honesty in his words struck something deep in Bella's chest. She'd been so focused on seeing him as her captor, the man holding her brother's fate hostage, that she hadn't considered he might have his own reasons for this arrangement beyond simple self-interest. What happened to your father? She asked softly. He was killed by men who didn't want the Moretti family going legitimate, Dante said, his voice hardening. Men who profit from chaos and violence and saw my father's vision as a threat. I was 21 when I took over, and I've spent every day since trying to finish what he started while also making sure the same thing doesn't happen to Sophia. That's why I do what I do, Isabella. Not because I enjoy violence or power, but because it's the only way I know to protect the people I love and honor the man my father tried to be. Bella found herself reaching out, covering his hand with hers in a gesture of comfort she hadn't planned. "I'm sorry." That must have been terrifying, taking on that responsibility so young. Dante looked at their joined hands, something flickering in his expression. "Not entirely different from you taking on guardianship of Marco at 18. We both became adults too fast, forced to be stronger than we felt ready to be. Maybe that's why this arrangement works better than I expected. We understand each other's burdens." The moment stretched between them, charged with recognition and connection that went beyond their contractual arrangement. Bella realized with a start that she was seeing Dante not as the Mafia boss who controlled her brother's fate, but as a man shaped by tragedy and responsibility, carrying weights she could relate to even if the specifics differed dramatically. Her phone buzzed, breaking the spell. A text from Marco checking if she was okay, if she'd be home soon. Bella reluctantly withdrew her hand from Dante's, suddenly aware of how that simple touch had felt more significant than it should have. "I should go," she said. "Marco worries." "Of course," Dante replied, though something in his eyes suggested he'd felt the shift between them too. "Vincent will walk you up." As Bella lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop replaying the conversation, the feel of Dante's hand under hers, the unexpected vulnerability in his voice. 4 months remained on their arrangement, and for the first time she found herself wondering not how she'd survive that time, but what would happen when it ended. The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. "I'm sorry," Marco kept saying. "I'm so sorry for all of this." "It's not your fault," Bella assured him. "None of this is your fault." Over Marco's shoulder, she met Dante's eyes across the chaos of police activity. He stood in shadows, watching them with an expression that made her chest ache. He'd kept his promise. He'd saved her brother, not through violence but through the kind of calculated strategy that proved he was far more than just the criminal everyone assumed him to be. Later that night, after Marco had been checked by doctors and given statements to police who seemed satisfied with his story of being grabbed randomly by men he couldn't identify, Bella found herself alone with Dante in his car. Vincent had taken Marco home while Dante insisted on driving Bella himself, claiming he needed to ensure she was truly all right. They drove in silence for several minutes before Bella finally found her voice. "Thank you. I know those words aren't enough, but thank you for bringing him home safe." "I told you I keep my promises," Dante replied, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "You risked a lot tonight," Bella continued. "Using your law enforcement connections that way, giving them evidence against the Castellanos. Won't that create problems for you?" "Probably," Dante admitted. "Lorenzo will eventually figure out I orchestrated tonight's events, and there will be consequences. But some things are worth the cost." He glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Your brother's safety was worth it. Your trust was worth it." Something in the way he said trust made Bella's breath catch. "Why does my trust matter to you?" Dante pulled the car over to the side of the road, putting it in park before turning to face her fully. "Because somewhere in the past few months, this stopped being just an arrangement for me. I look forward to our evenings together not because they serve my business interests, but because I enjoy your company. I find myself thinking about what you'd say about a painting I see, or wondering if a wine would meet your approval, or wanting to share moments with you that have nothing to do with galas or social climbing." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "You make me want to be the man my father envisioned, not just pretend to be him for appearances. That terrifies me more than any rival family ever could." Bella stared at him, her heart pounding. She should have been preparing for their arrangement to end, protecting herself from involvement with a man whose world would always carry danger. Instead, she'd been falling for him without letting herself acknowledge it, noticing the small kindnesses, the thoughtful gestures, the way he listened when she talked about art as if her passion mattered more than any business deal. She'd seen the man beneath the reputation, and that man had become someone she couldn't imagine walking away from in 3 months when their contract expired. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm terrified of what it means that I feel this way about you. That I'm not counting down the days until I'm free, but dreading when that day comes because it means losing you." Dante reached out, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "Then don't lose me. Stay not because a contract requires it but because you choose to. Not as my arranged companion, but as the woman I'm falling in love with." The confession hung between them, vulnerable and honest in a way that stripped away all the protections they'd both maintained. Bella leaned into his touch, closing her eyes against tears that were equal parts fear and relief and a dozen other emotions she couldn't name. "I don't know how to exist in your world," she whispered. "Then we'll figure it out together," Dante replied. I don't know how to exist in a relationship where someone sees past my reputation to who I actually am. We'll both be learning as we go. When he kissed her, soft and questioning, Bella kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been suppressing for months. It wasn't the passionate explosion of romance novels but something deeper, more profound, a promise and beginning wrapped into one moment of connection. The drive home felt different, her hand in his, both of them quiet but no longer because of contractual boundaries. They were simply two people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances, both scared and hopeful in equal measure about what came next. 3 months had passed since the night Marco was rescued, 3 months since Bella and Dante transformed their arrangement from contractual obligation into genuine relationship. The change had been gradual, like watching winter melt into spring where each day brought imperceptible shifts that accumulated into complete transformation. Bella still ran her gallery during the day, pouring her energy into promoting emerging artists and building the reputation she'd worked so hard to establish. But her evenings increasingly belonged to Dante, and not always in the public settings their original arrangement had mandated. They had dinner at quiet restaurants where conversation flowed easily, discussing everything from philosophy to politics to the challenges of leading when people expected either savior or monster with no acknowledgement of the complicated humanity between those extremes. They attended the opera because Dante loved music with a passion that surprised her, sitting in his private box where he'd unconsciously take her hand during particularly moving arias. They spent Sunday mornings at farmers' markets, wandering among stalls of fresh produce and artisan goods, Dante wearing jeans and a casual shirt that made him look younger, more approachable, just a man buying tomatoes and making his girlfriend laugh with dry observations about the aggressive politics of selecting the perfect avocado. Bella met Sofia properly during one of these market excursions. Dante's younger sister was 24, studying fashion design, with her brother's dark eyes but a warmth that suggested she'd been protected from the hardest edges of their family business. Sofia had been wary at first, clearly protective of Dante and suspicious of any woman getting close to him. But over coffee, discussing fabric choices and artistic vision, they'd discovered genuine connection that had nothing to do with Dante and everything to do with recognizing kindred creative spirits. "He's different with you," Sofia had confided during their third meeting, this time at Bella's gallery where she'd come to see a textile artist's exhibition. "I've never seen him actually relax before. It's like he forgets to be the boss when you're around and just gets to be my brother again." The observation had lodged itself in Bella's heart, a reminder of what this relationship meant to Dante beyond romance. She wasn't just his girlfriend, she was his escape from the constant pressure of maintaining the Moretti empire, the one place where he could lower his guard without fearing betrayal or weakness. That responsibility felt heavy sometimes, knowing how much he needed the sanctuary she provided. But he gave her gifts in return that she'd never expected. Bella had spent 8 years carrying Marco's care entirely alone, making every decision, solving every problem, never having backup or support when things got hard. Dante had quietly become that backup, checking on Marco's well-being, offering him honest work in the legitimate construction business Dante was building, treating him like a younger brother rather than a liability or obligation. When Marco had confessed he was struggling with gambling thoughts again, it had been Dante who'd found him a therapist, who'd sat with him through the first difficult meeting, who'd told him that recovery was possible because Dante himself had watched men in his organization overcome addiction with proper support. They'd established routines that felt domestic in ways Bella hadn't expected. Dante kept spare clothes at her apartment, his expensive suits hanging beside her thrift store finds in her cramped closet. She'd colonized a drawer at his penthouse with comfortable clothes for the nights she stayed over, gradually accumulating enough toiletries and personal items that it felt like a second home. They cooked together sometimes, Dante revealing surprising skills in the kitchen that he claimed came from learning to feed himself and Sofia after their mother died. He taught her to make his grandmother's sauce recipe while she introduced him to the simple comfort foods her mother had made, both of them sharing pieces of their histories through food and memory. The physical intimacy between them had developed naturally, without pressure or expectations. Their first time had been tender and unhurried, Dante making very clear that her comfort mattered more than his desire, both of them nervous and fumbling despite the chemistry between them. But they'd learned each other gradually, discovering preferences and boundaries, building trust not just emotionally but physically. Dante was surprisingly gentle, his touches reverent in ways that made Bella feel cherished rather than simply wanted. And she'd learned that beneath his controlled exterior lived a man who craved affection he'd rarely received, who would melt under soft touches and whispered endearments, who needed to be wanted for himself rather than his power or protection. But their happiness existed in a precarious balance. surrounded by dangers neither could forget. The Castellano situation had escalated exactly as Dante had predicted. Lorenzo had eventually pieced together Dante's role in the FBI raid, and the resulting tension between their families simmered with promises of eventual conflict. Dante's men reported increased activity from Castellano associates, probing at the boundaries of Moretti territory, testing for weaknesses. Several legitimate businesses with Moretti backing had experienced harassment, vandalism, subtle threats designed to erode confidence in Dante's protection. Bella tried not to let the threat consume her, but it was impossible to forget when Dante insisted Vincent accompany her whenever she traveled alone, when new security systems appeared at her gallery and apartment, when she'd catch Dante staring at nothing with an expression that spoke of calculations and contingencies he wouldn't burden her with by explaining. One evening in late spring, they attended an exclusive gallery opening featuring a photographer whose work Bella had long admired. The event was smaller than the massive galas of their early arrangement, perhaps 50 guests scattered through elegant rooms where photographs captured moments of stark beauty and profound humanity. Bella had been looking forward to this for weeks, excited to experience art she genuinely cared about with Dante beside her. They were studying a particularly striking portrait, discussing the photographer's use of natural light, when a man's voice interrupted from behind them. "Isabella Russo. I'd heard you'd moved up in the world, but seeing it firsthand is something else." Bella turned to find Andrew Patterson, a former colleague from her early days struggling in the art world. He'd been a curator at a small gallery where she'd briefly worked, pompous and condescending, the kind of man who treated her like an intern rather than acknowledging her knowledge or skills. She'd been relieved when that job ended, freeing her to open her own space. "Andrew," she said politely, not warmly, "I didn't know you were interested in contemporary photography." "I'm interested in understanding how some people get ahead so quickly," Andrew replied, his eyes flickering to Dante with obvious calculation. "Must be nice having the right connections, the right patrons supporting your little gallery venture." The insult was clear enough to make Bella's face heat, but before she could respond, Dante stepped closer, his body language shifting into something that made Andrew unconsciously step back. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Dante said, his voice pleasant but carrying undertones that promised consequences. "I'm Dante Moretti, Isabella's boyfriend. And you are?" "Andrew Patterson," he said, offering his hand with false confidence. "I used to work with Bella before before her career took its interesting trajectory." Dante ignored the offered hand. "Interesting trajectory. What exactly do you mean by that?" Andrew's bravado was crumbling under Dante's cold attention. "I just meant that success in the art world usually takes years, decades even, but Bella managed to build a thriving gallery in record time. Makes one wonder about the factors contributing to such rapid success." "Wonder all you want," Bella said sharply, finding her voice. "Every artist in my gallery, every exhibition I've curated, every success I've had came from hard work, knowledge and dedication to art rather than ego. If your career hasn't progressed the way you wanted, perhaps look at your own choices rather than inventing conspiracies about mine." "Easy to be confident when you have a mob boss bankrolling everything," Andrew muttered, loud enough to be heard. The temperature in their immediate area seemed to drop. Dante's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness made Andrew's face go pale. "I've been patient with your rudeness because Isabella is kind enough to engage in civil conversation even with people who don't deserve it," Dante said quietly. "But you've crossed a line. Her success has nothing to do with me and everything to do with her talent, intelligence and work ethic. The fact that you can't acknowledge that says everything about your character and nothing about hers." He turned to Bella, his expression softening immediately. "Would you like to leave? We don't need to waste our evening on small men with smaller minds." Bella nodded, grateful for the escape. As they walked away, she heard Andrew attempting to apologize, but Dante's security had materialized from somewhere, subtly ensuring Andrew didn't follow. In the car, Bella found herself shaking with a mix of anger and humiliation. "I'm sorry," Dante said, taking her hand. "I know my presence in your life creates situations like that, people making assumptions about our relationship and your accomplishments. It's not your fault that people are narrow-minded," Bella replied. "But he's right about one thing. People do talk, do assume my gallery's success has more to do with you than with me. I hate that my work gets dismissed because of who I'm dating." "Then prove them wrong," Dante said simply. "Keep building your gallery, keep promoting artists, keep doing the work that has nothing to do with me. Let your success speak for itself. The people who matter will see the truth, and the Andrew Pattersons of the world don't matter at all." His confidence in her made the humiliation sting less. Bella leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his cologne mixed with his own scent that had become comfort and home to her. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Deal with people constantly judging you, making assumptions, reducing everything you do to simplified narratives?" "I remember who I am beyond their opinions," Dante answered. "I know the truth of my actions, my motivations, the complicated reality that doesn't fit in the boxes people want to put me in. Their judgment doesn't change who I am. It only reveals who they are." They spent the rest of the evening at Dante's penthouse, curled together on his couch, talking about art and dreams and the future in ways that felt increasingly solid rather than hypothetical. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being a relationship with an expiration date and started being something neither wanted to end. But the universe seemed determined to test them. 3 weeks after the gallery incident, the Castellano situation erupted into crisis. Bella was at her gallery late afternoon, preparing for an upcoming exhibition, when Vincent appeared at the door with an urgency that immediately triggered alarms. "Miss Russo, I need you to come with me right now," he said, no preamble or pleasantries. "What's wrong? Is it Dante?" Fear clutched her chest. "He's fine, but there's a situation developing. He wants you somewhere secure while we handle it." The secure location turned out to be the same facility where Bella had waited during Marco's rescue, and this time the atmosphere was even more tense. Men moved with military precision, voices clipped and urgent as they coordinated whatever operation was unfolding. Dante was at the center, directing actions with the kind of cold authority that reminded Bella exactly who and what he was beneath the boyfriend who bought her flowers and made her breakfast. He looked up as she entered, something in his expression softening briefly before hardening again. "Vincent, take her to the back office. Make sure she's comfortable." "I want to know what's happening," Bella said firmly. "Lorenzo made his move," Dante said. "He's targeting several of our legitimate businesses simultaneously, trying to provoke a reaction. More importantly, he's made specific threats against you and Sophia. I'm not letting him get anywhere near either of you." The fact that Sophia was also being protected elsewhere made Bella realize how seriously Dante was taking this threat. "What are you going to do?" "End this," Dante said simply. "I've been patient, tried to avoid escalation, but Lorenzo isn't interested in peace. He wants war, so I'm going to give him exactly enough rope to hang himself with." Vincent led Bella to a smaller office and returned with water and snacks, trying to make her comfortable despite the tension permeating the building. Hours dragged past with no updates, just the background hum of activity beyond the door and Bella's imagination running wild with terrible possibilities. Finally, near midnight, Dante appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his suit jacket discarded somewhere and his tie loosened but unharmed. Bella flew to him, wrapping her arms around him in relief that made her shake. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "Lorenzo pushed too far, made mistakes that gave me leverage. He's been arrested on multiple federal charges, won't see the outside of a prison for decades. The FBI was very interested in evidence of his operations that mysteriously appeared in their possession tonight." "You used the same strategy as with Marco," Bella realized. "It works," Dante replied. "And it accomplishes my goals without starting a street war that would get my people killed. Lorenzo wanted me to react with violence, to give him justification for escalation. Instead, I used the legal system to remove him from the board entirely." They stood holding each other for long minutes, both processing how close they'd come to something terrible. Finally, Dante pulled back enough to look at her face. "This is the reality of my life, Isabella. Even as I move toward legitimate business, there will always be people like Lorenzo testing boundaries, threatening what I care about. I can protect you, but I can't make the danger disappear entirely. You need to decide if you can live with that." Bella thought about the past months, the happiness they'd built alongside the danger, the way Dante had become essential to her life in ways she'd never expected. She thought about Sophia's friendship, about Marco's recovery with Dante's support, about the future they'd started imagining together. And she thought about walking away, returning to the safer but lonelier life she'd had before, and couldn't imagine it anymore. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "We'll figure out how to handle the danger together. That's what partners do." Something in Dante's expression broke, vulnerability flooding through the cracks in his control. "I love you," he said, raw and honest. "I know it's complicated and dangerous and probably foolish to love someone as much as I love you, but I can't help it. You're everything I didn't know I needed." "I love you too," Bella whispered, tears streaming down her face. "So much it terrifies me. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you." They kissed then, desperate and relieved and full of promises neither had words for. When they finally left the facility, the sun was rising on a new day, on a future that felt suddenly more possible than it had hours before. The next weeks unfolded with a lightness Bella hadn't experienced since before Marco's death first brought Dante into her life. With Lorenzo Castellano removed from power, the threat level decreased significantly. Dante's organization experienced a period of relative peace, allowing him to focus more attention on the legitimate businesses he'd been building. He brought Bella into these ventures not as decoration but as genuine partner, valuing her insights on real estate investments, asking her opinion on developments he was considering. They spent a weekend at his family's lake house, a beautiful property that felt worlds away from Chicago's urban intensity. Sophia joined them, and the three of them existed in a bubble where mob politics and danger felt distant as they swam, cooked elaborate meals together, and stayed up late talking about dreams and plans. Bella watched Dante with his sister, saw the tenderness and playfulness he rarely showed others, and fell even more deeply in love with the man underneath the reputation. One evening, as they sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, Dante turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Can I show you something?" he asked. He led her back to the house and upstairs to what had been his childhood bedroom, largely unchanged from when he'd left for university. Photographs lined the walls showing a younger Dante with his parents and baby Sophia, all of them smiling with a happiness that made Bella's chest ache knowing how it ended. But Dante guided her to a shelf where a small box sat, worn velvet faded with age. "This was my grandmother's," he said, opening it to reveal a ring. Simple and elegant, a single diamond set in platinum with delicate filigree that spoke of another era. "She gave it to my father when he married my mother, told him it represented the kind of love that survives anything because it's built on genuine partnership. My father gave it to me before he died, said I'd know when I found the woman worthy of it." Bella's heart was thundering so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. Dante took the ring from the box, holding it carefully. "I know we've only been together for 6 months, he continued. "I know people will say it's too fast, that we're being reckless. But Isabella, you've seen every part of me, the good and the terrible and everything between. You've seen my world at its darkest and you chose to stay. You make me want to be better, to build the life my father dreamed of, to create something lasting and legitimate. I can't imagine my future without you in it." He dropped to one knee and Bella found she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare at this powerful man making himself vulnerable before her. "Will you marry me?" Dante asked. "Will you be my partner in everything, help me build a life that honors both our dreams? Will you let me spend the rest of my days proving I'm worthy of the trust you've given me?" "Yes," Bella managed through tears. "Yes, of course, yes. I love you so much, Dante. I want everything with you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and pulled her into a kiss that felt like sealing a promise, like stepping through a door into a future neither had expected but both wanted desperately. Sophia's delighted scream from the doorway reminded them they weren't alone, and suddenly they were all laughing and crying and celebrating together. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that blended both their worlds perfectly. The venue was Bella's gallery, transformed with flowers and candlelight into something magical. Sophia served as Bella's maid of honor, standing beside her in a dress she'd designed herself. Marco, clean and sober and rebuilding his life, walked Bella down the aisle with pride shining in his eyes. Vincent stood as Dante's best man, the loyal friend who'd been there through everything. The guest list was small but meaningful, artists and gallery owners mixing with Dante's legitimate business associates, Sophia's friends from design school chatting with Bella's art world connections. Notably absent were the darker elements of Dante's past, a conscious choice that represented the future he was building toward rather than the world he was leaving behind. As they exchanged vows, Dante whispered the words that had started everything, transformed now from possessive statement to loving promise. "Let them watch," he said softly. "Let them see how much you mean to me, how you're not just my wife but my partner, my equal, the woman who transformed my life completely." "Let them watch," Bella agreed, smiling through tears. "Let them see what real love looks like when you're willing to fight for it." The reception was joyful and intimate, speeches that made everyone laugh and cry, dancing that lasted into the early morning, a celebration of love that had bloomed in impossible circumstances and survived everything thrown at it. When Dante and Bella finally left, drove away toward their honeymoon and future, they carried with them the knowledge that they'd found something rare and precious, a partnership that balanced strength and vulnerability, protection and freedom, the darkness of his past with the light of their shared future. 2 years of marriage transformed Dante and Bella's life in ways neither had fully anticipated when they'd said their vows in that flower-filled gallery. The transition hadn't always been smooth, requiring adjustments and compromises from both of them as they navigated merging two very different worlds into one shared existence. But they'd approached every challenge together, building a foundation of communication and trust that made even the difficult moments feel surmountable. Dante's business transformation had continued steadily. The Moretti name was still known, still carried weight, but increasingly that weight came from legitimate enterprises rather than criminal operations. His real estate holdings had expanded dramatically, focusing on affordable housing development that provided quality homes for working families while generating sustainable profits. The security company Vincent managed employed dozens of former criminals who needed second chances, offering them legitimate work and the kind of structure that made leaving dangerous lives possible. Dante had investments in technology startups, served on charity boards, and had become a surprisingly effective advocate for criminal justice reform, using his unique perspective to push for policies that actually reduced recidivism rather than simply warehousing offenders. There were still connections to his family's past, relationships and obligations he couldn't simply abandon without creating dangerous power vacuums. But Dante had become skilled at walking the line between honoring old loyalties and refusing to participate in activities that contradicted the life he was building. He'd made it clear to the remaining elements of organized crime in Chicago that the Moretti family was transitioning toward legitimacy, and while he wouldn't tolerate threats against his territory or people, he also wouldn't engage in the kind of violence that had defined previous generations. Not everyone had appreciated this evolution. Some of his father's old associates saw it as weakness, betrayal of the legacy they'd built. There had been tense conversations, veiled threats, even a few attempts to pull Dante back into darker waters. But he'd stood firm, backed by Bella's unwavering support and his own commitment to becoming the man his father had envisioned. Gradually, his reputation had shifted from dangerous criminal to powerful businessman with questionable past, which somehow felt like progress even if it meant he'd never fully escape the shadows of his history. Bella's gallery had flourished beyond her wildest early dreams. She'd expanded to a larger space 2 years ago, doubling her exhibition capacity and adding a small sculpture garden that had become one of Chicago's hidden gems for art lovers. Her reputation for discovering emerging artists had grown, and several of her early champions had gone on to significant careers, always crediting Bella's early support and guidance. She'd been profiled in art magazines, invited to speak at conferences, and had even served as a guest lecturer at the Art Institute of Chicago, teaching workshops on curation and gallery management. The whispers about her relationship with Dante had never completely disappeared, but Bella had learned to let them roll off her back. Her body of work spoke for itself, and the people whose opinions actually mattered recognized her talent and dedication regardless of who she'd married. She'd developed a thick skin about the assumptions, the occasional rude comment, the implication that her success was purchased rather than earned. Dante's advice had proven correct. Proving them wrong through continued excellence mattered more than defending herself to people determined to believe the worst. But the most transformative change had come 15 months ago when Bella discovered she was pregnant. The news had sent both of them into emotional tailspins, joy and terror intermingling so completely that neither could separate one from the other. Dante had been overwhelmed, terrified he wouldn't know how to be a good father given his own complicated childhood and the violence that had shaped his early years. He'd spent weeks spiraling, working obsessively on ensuring every possible security measure was in place, that their finances were absolutely secure, that he had contingency plans for contingencies. It had taken Bella sitting him down, forcing him to look at her, and reminding him that being a good father didn't require being perfect, just being present and loving and committed to learning. The pregnancy had been challenging physically for Bella. Morning sickness lasted well into the second trimester, and she'd had to reduce her hours at the gallery as exhaustion overtook her. But Dante had been incredible, attentive and supportive in ways that made her fall in love with him all over again. He'd gone to every appointment, read parenting books with the same intensity he brought to business contracts, and had transformed one of their home's spare bedrooms into a nursery with careful attention to every detail. Elena Rose Moretti had arrived on a snowy December evening, making her entrance 3 weeks early and sending Dante into barely controlled panic as they rushed to the hospital. The labor had been long and difficult, 14 hours that tested Bella's endurance in ways she hadn't imagined possible. But when the doctor finally placed their daughter in Dante's arms, watching his face transform with wonder and terror and overwhelming love, Bella had known that everything they'd survived, every challenge they'd faced, had been worth it to reach this moment. Elena had her father's dark hair and her mother's eyes, a perfect combination that made strangers stop them on the street to coo over her beauty. But more than physical traits, she'd inherited her father's fierce determination and her mother's curiosity about the world, creating a tiny person who demanded attention and engagement from the moment she gained awareness of her surroundings. Now, at 18 months, Elena was a whirlwind of energy and personality. She toddled through their home with the confidence of someone who knew she was adored, chattering in her toddler language that became more comprehensible daily. She had particular opinions about everything from what clothes she'd wear to which books she wanted read to her 14 times in a row. She loved art, spending hours at Bella's gallery helping by pointing at paintings and offering pronouncements in gibberish that everyone treated as profound criticism. And she was absolutely, completely Daddy's girl, lighting up whenever Dante walked through the door, demanding he play endless games of peekaboo, falling asleep most peacefully when he held her and sang Italian lullabies his grandmother had taught him. Watching Dante with Elena made Bella's heart ache with happiness. All his fears about not knowing how to be a good father had proven groundless. He was patient and playful, setting boundaries while being gentle, making time for his daughter no matter how demanding his business schedule became. He'd adjusted his entire life around being present, declining evening meetings so he could do bath time, working from home several days a week so he wouldn't miss important moments, treating fatherhood with the same commitment and intensity he brought to everything else. The exhaustion of new parenthood had tested them both. The sleepless nights, the constant needs of an infant, the challenge of maintaining their relationship while being responsible for another human's complete welfare, all of it had created stress that occasionally erupted into arguments and frustration. But they'd learned to communicate through the difficulties, to ask for help when they needed it, to give each other grace when patience wore thin. Bella's gallery manager had stepped up wonderfully, allowing Bella to work fewer hours during Elena's first year. Dante had brought in a nanny for weekday mornings so Bella could focus on gallery work without guilt. They'd built support systems that let them balance parenthood with their careers and relationship. Sophia had become an incredible aunt, visiting frequently to spend time with Elena and provide Bella and Dante rare date nights. She'd finished her fashion degree and was launching her own line, designing children's clothes that mixed whimsy and sophistication. Elena was her favorite model, photographed in Sophia's creations for the social media presence she was building. The relationship between the two sisters-in-law had deepened into genuine friendship, and Bella couldn't imagine her life now without Sophia's presence and support. Marco had continued his recovery journey, now 3 years sober and thriving in his role with Dante's security company. He'd met someone, a woman named Jennifer who worked as a social worker and understood the complexities of recovery and family trauma. Their relationship was serious, steady in ways that made Bella's protective heart relax slightly knowing Marco had his own support system now. He visited often, doting on Elena with the kind of uncle love that was equal parts genuine affection and trying to make up for the chaos of his earlier mistakes. Bella had long forgiven him, but Marco seemed determined to prove he was worthy of her faith in him. Vincent remained Dante's closest friend and most trusted advisor, but he'd also become like family. Uncle Vinny was one of Elena's first words, and he took his honorary uncle status seriously, showing up with books and toys and the kind of patient attention that small children instinctively recognized and loved. He'd been dating someone for the past year, a teacher named Rachel who Bella genuinely liked, and their relationship seemed headed toward permanence. Bella loved watching the chosen family they'd all become, bound together by loyalty and affection rather than just blood. But parenthood had also brought unexpected challenges in how people viewed their family. Bella had faced judgmental comments from other mothers at playgroups, women who couldn't separate Dante's reputation from the reality of who he was as a father and husband. She'd overheard whispers at the pediatrician's office, speculation about what kind of environment Elena was being raised in, whether it was safe or appropriate. The assumptions had stung, reinforcing that they'd never fully escape Dante's past no matter how completely he'd transformed. Dante had handled it better than Bella initially, his years of dealing with judgment making him more philosophical about people's narrow-mindedness. "Let them talk," he'd said when Bella came home upset from a particularly awful encounter at a children's museum. "We know the truth of our family, the love we have for Elena, the safe and nurturing home we're providing. Their ignorance doesn't change reality, it just reveals their character." Still, Bella couldn't help worrying about how this would affect Elena as she grew older. Would she face bullying because of her father's reputation? Would she be excluded from activities, judged by other children's parents, forced to defend or explain her family in ways other kids never had to? These fears kept Bella awake some nights, watching Elena sleep peacefully, wondering how to protect her daughter from prejudice they couldn't prevent. When Bella expressed these concerns to Dante during one of their late-night conversations while Elena slept between them, he'd been quiet for a long time before responding. "I've thought about this constantly," he admitted. "The possibility that my past will hurt our children is my deepest fear. But I also know that we can't protect Elena from every difficulty, every judgment. What we can do is raise her with strong sense of self, teach her to evaluate people based on their character rather than reputation, and model how to navigate a complicated world with integrity. She'll face challenges because of who we are, but she'll also have advantages. Our job is to prepare her for both." His words had helped, though Bella still worried. But she tried to focus on the present, on the beautiful moments that filled their days. Elena's first steps, her delighted laughter when Dante tossed her in the air, her serious concentration as she tried to feed herself with a spoon, her bedtime routine of demanding exactly 3 stories and 2 songs before finally consenting to sleep. These were the memories Bella wanted to fill their daughter's childhood, not anxiety about judgments they couldn't control. The second pregnancy came as a surprise when Elena was just over 2 years old. Bella had assumed they'd wait longer, give themselves more time to adjust to one child before considering another. But life had other plans, and when the test showed positive, both of them had cycled through shock and excitement in equal measure. This time, the pregnancy was easier physically, perhaps because Bella knew what to expect and had learned to pace herself better. Or perhaps Elena kept her so busy chasing an energetic toddler that she didn't have time to focus on discomfort. Antonio Luca Moretti arrived on a perfect spring morning, his birth quick and relatively uncomplicated compared to his sister's dramatic entrance. He was bigger than Elena had been, with his mother's lighter coloring and a calm temperament that was immediately apparent. Where Elena had been fussy and demanding as an infant, Antonio seemed content to observe the world quietly, crying only when genuinely distressed rather than simply for attention. Elena's reaction to her baby brother had been mixed. She'd been excited during the pregnancy, talking to Bella's belly and planning all the things she'd teach her sibling. But the reality of sharing parental attention had been challenging. There had been regression, tantrums, testing boundaries in ways that exhausted Bella and Dante even as they understood it was developmentally normal. But gradually, Elena had adjusted, and Bella would find her singing to Antonio when she thought no one was watching, or bringing him toys, or patting his head with the kind of gentle care that made Bella's eyes water. Now, with Antonio 6 months old and Elena 2.5, their home was complete chaos and perfect joy in equal measure. The elegant penthouse Dante had maintained as a bachelor had transformed into a space dominated by children's toys, art supplies, board books scattered across every surface, and the general disorder that came with small children. They'd bought a house in the suburbs, needing more space for their growing family, something with a yard where the kids could play safely and neighbors who weren't concerned about noise levels. The house represented another step away from Dante's past. It was solidly upper middle class rather than ostentatiously wealthy, a beautiful home in a good neighborhood but nothing that screamed mob money or criminal empire. Their neighbors were doctors and lawyers and business executives, people who might have heard Dante's name but chose to judge him based on how he maintained his lawn and whether he attended homeowners association meetings rather than on his reputation. It felt like finally having the normal life neither Bella nor Dante had really believed was possible for them. Dante had stepped back even further from the remnants of his family's criminal operations over the past 2 years. He'd transferred many of his responsibilities to trusted associates who were more comfortable existing in the gray areas he'd left behind, maintaining just enough connection to ensure stability but removing himself from day-to-day involvement. His focus now was almost entirely on legitimate business, on growing enterprises that could provide generational wealth for his children without the moral compromises that had funded previous Moretti generations. It had cost him some relationships, people who saw his withdrawal as betrayal or weakness. But it had also earned him unexpected respect from people who'd written him off as irredeemable. He'd been invited to speak at business schools about entrepreneurship and transition, though he carefully edited his past when discussing his journey. He'd been profiled in business magazines as an example of successful pivoting in changing markets, the articles dancing carefully around exactly what markets he'd initially operated in. He'd become, improbably, almost respectable, though always with the qualifier of his background lurking in any introduction. Bella had watched this transformation with pride and relief. Every step away from danger meant their children would grow up safer, more normal, less burdened by the weight of Dante's history. She knew he struggled sometimes with whether he'd done enough, whether his past could ever truly be left behind, whether he'd successfully broken the cycle of violence that had defined Moretti men for generations. But she reminded him constantly that success wasn't measured by complete erasure of the past, but by the choices he made every day to be better, to build better, to ensure his children inherited opportunity rather than obligation to criminal empire. The gallery continued thriving, though Bella had adjusted her role to accommodate motherhood. She'd promoted her assistant manager to co-director, sharing responsibilities in ways that let her maintain creative control while having flexibility for her children. She still discovered new artists, still curated exhibitions, still felt the thrill of revealing talent to the world. But she also left at reasonable hours to pick up Elena from preschool, took Wednesdays off to spend full days with both children, and had learned to be present in moments rather than constantly thinking about what needed to happen next at work. Finding balance had been perhaps their greatest challenge. Both Bella and Dante were ambitious, driven people who'd built their identities around professional success. Learning to prioritize family without losing themselves entirely, maintaining their relationship as partners and lovers rather than just co-parents, preserving individual identities while being part of a family unit, all of it required constant communication and adjustment. They had weekly date nights, even if date night sometimes meant ordering takeout after the kids were asleep and watching a movie on their couch because they were too exhausted to go out. They took annual trips without the children, letting Sophia and Vincent handle childcare while Bella and Dante remembered why they'd fallen in love beyond just being good partners in parenting. They argued sometimes, usually about balancing responsibilities or making decisions about the children's future. Bella wanted Elena in public school, believing in the importance of diverse environments and learning alongside children from all backgrounds. Dante worried about security, about prejudice, about whether public school could adequately protect their daughter from both physical danger and social cruelty. They'd compromised on a private school with diverse enrollment and strong anti-bullying policies, both of them giving up aspects of their ideal solution to find middle ground they could both accept. These negotiations, learning when to insist and when to compromise, had become the foundation of their marriage. One evening in late summer, with both children finally asleep after a day at the zoo that had exhausted everyone, Bella and Dante sat on their back deck watching fireflies drift through the gathering darkness. Antonio had fallen asleep in Dante's arms during the drive home and Dante had carried him inside, settling him in his crib with the kind of practiced gentleness that had become second nature. Elena had demanded Mom put her to bed, wanting her routine of stories and songs, falling asleep mid-sentence of the third book with the sudden collapse only small children achieved. "Do you ever miss it?" Bella asked quietly. "The simplicity of before when it was just us?" Dante was quiet, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss sleeping more than 4 consecutive hours," he admitted with a small smile. "And I miss spontaneous decisions, being able to just decide to go somewhere without coordinating childcare and packing 17 bags of supplies. But miss our life before Elena and Antonio? Never. They've made everything better, given me purpose beyond just building an empire or escaping my father's shadow. I'm happier as their father than I've ever been at anything else." Bella leaned against his shoulder, feeling the truth of his words. "I never imagined this," she confessed. "When you first called me to that restaurant when I thought I was walking into a nightmare, I couldn't have imagined that it would lead to this. To us, to our children, to actually being happy despite everything." "Let them watch," Dante murmured, echoing the words that had become their private motto. "Let them see what we've built from impossible circumstances. Let them see that love isn't about perfect conditions or uncomplicated histories. It's about choosing each other every day, building something that survives despite everything working against it." "Let them watch," Bella agreed softly. "Let them see our family, see our children growing up loved and safe. Let them see that we made it work." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell completely around them, fireflies dancing in the darkness like tiny stars, the house behind them full of sleeping children and the life they'd built together. Bella thought about the journey that had brought them here, every challenge and fear and moment of doubt that had seemed insurmountable at the time. She thought about meeting Dante in that restaurant, convinced he was the villain in her story, discovering instead that he was the partner she'd never known she needed. Inside, Elena stirred and called out, her voice carrying through the baby monitor. "Daddy? Daddy, where are you?" Dante stood immediately, that automatic response parents developed where their children's voices triggered instant reaction. "I've got her," he said to Bella, squeezing her shoulder as he passed. Bella stayed on the deck, listening through the monitor as Dante entered Elena's room, his voice soft and soothing as he settled their daughter back to sleep. She heard Elena's sleepy questions about whether the fireflies they'd seen earlier would come visit her room, Dante's patient explanations about how fireflies lived outside, Elena's insistence that she wanted to keep one as a pet, Dante's gentle redirection toward the stuffed animal she'd named Sparkle who could be her pretend firefly friend. The conversation was pure domesticity, the kind of unremarkable moment that filled their daily lives but somehow contained all the love and patience that made family work. When Dante returned to the deck 15 minutes later, Bella pulled him down beside her. "You're a good father," she said. "I know you worried you wouldn't be, but you're incredible at it. Our children are so lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have them," Dante replied. "To have all of you. Every choice I've made for the past 5 years has been about becoming worthy of this family, of the trust you put in me. I don't take any of it for granted." They talked late into the night, making plans for the future in ways that felt both exciting and grounding. They discussed Elena starting preschool in the fall, whether they wanted to try for a third child eventually, what renovations the house needed, where they might vacation next summer. Ordinary concerns that felt extraordinary because they represented a life Bella had never expected to have, a future with Dante that had seemed impossible when they'd first met. The years continued flowing past with the strange acceleration that came with small children, each day feeling endless but weeks and months disappearing in blurs of activity. Elena started preschool and thrived, making friends and bringing home artwork that Bella displayed as proudly as any gallery piece. She had her father's confidence and her mother's artistic sensibility, creating elaborate stories and paintings that showed genuine creative talent even at her young age. Teachers commented on how well-adjusted she was, how kind to other children, how curious about the world. If any of them knew or cared about Dante's reputation, they never let it affect how they treated Elena. Antonio grew from calm infant into curious toddler, following his sister everywhere and trying to copy everything she did. He had his mother's patience and his father's intensity, focusing on tasks with single-minded determination that sometimes resulted in spectacular messes and sometimes in surprising achievements. Where Elena was all energy and expression, Antonio was thoughtful and observant, processing the world carefully before acting. Bella watched her children grow with wonder and occasional terror at how quickly time moved. She'd blink and Elena would be 2 inches taller, using new words, expressing opinions that showed increasingly sophisticated thinking. She'd turn around and Antonio would have learned to climb something he shouldn't, developing skills faster than her ability to childproof could keep up with. The exhaustion of parenting never quite disappeared, but it transformed into different challenges as the children aged out of some difficulties and into new ones. The gallery had become institution in Chicago's art scene, known for quality exhibitions and commitment to emerging artists. Bella had expanded into representing artists more formally, building a roster of talent she believed in and helping them navigate careers in an industry that could be predatory and difficult. She'd published a book about contemporary curation, drawing on her years of experience and the unique perspective she'd developed. The book had been surprisingly successful, leading to speaking engagements and consulting work that she carefully limited to maintain family balance. Dante's businesses had continued growing, now encompassing real estate development across multiple cities, a security company that employed hundreds, venture capital investments in promising startups, and a charitable foundation focused on criminal justice reform and second-chance employment. He'd successfully transformed the Moretti legacy from organized crime to legitimate empire, though the transition had taken years and constant vigilance. He sat on corporate boards, advised politicians on policy, and had become the kind of businessman whose opinion was sought and valued. The reputation that had once been purely dangerous had evolved into something complex, his past acknowledged but no longer defining him entirely. There were still moments when the shadows of his history emerged. A news story about organized crime would mention the Moretti family's past, requiring conversations with Elena about why people sometimes said complicated things about Daddy. A business deal would fall through when someone did deep background research and decided they couldn't risk association with Dante regardless of his current legitimacy. Old associates would occasionally reach out, trying to pull him back into situations he'd left behind, requiring firm boundaries and sometimes uncomfortable confrontations. But these moments became less frequent as years passed and Dante's legitimate success spoke louder than his criminal history. Sophia had married her long-term boyfriend in a beautiful ceremony where Elena served as flower girl and managed to make it down the aisle without eating her petals, which Bella considered a victory. Sophia's fashion line had taken off, her designs appearing in major magazines and on celebrities, building a brand that had nothing to do with her family name and everything to do with her genuine talent. She and her husband bought a house 2 streets from Bella and Dante, keeping the family close and giving the cousins to be built-in playmates once Sophia announced her own pregnancy a year after her wedding. Marco had married Jennifer in a small ceremony, both of them wanting something intimate rather than elaborate. He'd completed his degree in construction management while working for Dante, and was now managing significant projects with competence that made Bella's heart swell with pride. He'd had a few relapses in his recovery journey, moments where the temptation of gambling had overwhelmed his coping mechanisms, but each time he'd gotten back on track more quickly, learned better strategies, built stronger support systems. He visited weekly for family dinners, and Bella treasured these gatherings where her children could know their uncle, where Marco could be part of their family in stable, healthy ways. Vincent had become family director more than just security chief, the person who coordinated schedules and ensured everyone's safety while also organizing surprise birthday parties and remembering everyone's favorite foods. His relationship with Rachel had progressed to marriage, and they'd recently announced they were expecting twins, news that had sent the entire extended family into excited chaos. Uncle Vinny having his own children would change dynamics in ways everyone was still processing, but the anticipation was joyful. On Elena's 5th birthday, they threw a party that filled their backyard with children, family, and friends. There were games and cake and presents, all the typical trappings of childhood celebration. But watching Elena surrounded by friends, laughing and confident and secure in herself, Bella felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they'd built. This was what all their struggles had been for, creating a childhood where their daughter felt safe and loved and normal despite the complicated history that shaped her parents. As the party wound down and guests departed, as Elena crashed from sugar and excitement and fell asleep still wearing her birthday crown, Bella and Dante cleaned up the debris of celebration in comfortable silence. Antonio helped by collecting discarded wrapping paper and stuffing it into a bag, though he created more mess than he solved, but his concentrated effort was too adorable to discourage. "She's so happy," Dante said quietly, watching Elena sleep on the couch. "Look at her face. That's what peace looks like." "We did that," Bella replied. "Whatever mistakes we've made, whatever challenges we've faced, we gave her this. We gave both of them this." Dante pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "I love you," he said simply. "Thank you for seeing past who I was to who I could become. Thank you for building this life with me." "I love you too," Bella murmured. "Thank you for keeping your promises. All of them." They stood holding each other as afternoon became evening, their children safe and happy around them, the future stretching ahead full of ordinary moments and extraordinary love. The path from that first meeting in the restaurant to this moment in their backyard had been complex and sometimes terrifying, requiring courage and compromise and constant choice to keep building toward something better. But standing here now, surrounded by evidence of the life they'd created, Bella wouldn't change any of it. The story of Dante and Isabella Moretti wasn't a fairy tale, because fairy tales implied simplicity their relationship had never had. It was something better, something real, a love built not despite darkness but because they'd faced that darkness together and refused to let it define them. They transformed an arrangement born of desperation into partnership built on genuine affection, respect, and shared vision for future they wanted to create. Let them watch indeed. Let the world see what happened when two people from impossible circumstances chose each other, chose love, chose to build something that honored their complicated pasts while reaching toward better futures. Let them see family built not on perfect conditions but on imperfect people doing their absolute best to love well and raise children who would carry forward light rather than shadows. As stars emerged in the darkening sky and fireflies began their nightly dance, Bella thought about how far they'd come from that rainy night in her gallery when Marco's confession had sent her life spiraling. She thought about sitting across from Dante in that restaurant, convinced he was her nightmare come to life, having no idea he would become her greatest love. She thought about every choice they'd made since, every challenge they'd overcome, every moment of doubt transformed into determination. The future would bring more challenges, she knew. Elena and Antonio would grow up, would ask hard questions about their father's past and their family's history. They'd face prejudice and judgment, would have to reconcile loving their father with understanding the complicated man he'd been. There would be teenage years and rebellion, heartbreaks and disappointments, all the natural challenges of raising children into adults. Dante's past would never completely disappear, would always lurk as potential complication or explanation for difficulties they encountered. But they would face it all together as they'd faced everything else. They had built something strong enough to weather storms, flexible enough to adapt to change, deep enough to sustain them through whatever came next. They had each other, their children, their chosen family of Sophia and Marco and Vincent and everyone else who'd become essential to their lives. They had love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, more real, more precious for having survived. Dante carried Elena to her bed while Bella settled Antonio in his crib, both children exhausted from celebration and excitement. They met in the hallway between the children's rooms, and Dante pulled Bella close for a soft kiss. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Incredibly," Bella replied honestly. "Are you?" "More than I ever imagined possible," Dante said. "You gave me this, Isabella. You saw something in me worth saving, worth building a life with. Everything good in my life comes from you saying yes that night, from trusting me despite every reason not to." "We gave this to each other," Bella corrected. "I couldn't have built this life alone any more than you could have. We're partners, remember? Equal partners in everything." They walked to their bedroom hand in hand, closing the door on another day of their extraordinary ordinary life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, more moments of love and frustration and wonder. There would be breakfast chaos and work demands and children's needs and all the beautiful messy reality of family life. But tonight, they had this moment of peace, this acknowledgement of how far they'd traveled and how much they'd built together. The story that had begun with, "Let them watch, they'll learn you belong to me," had transformed into something neither could have predicted. Not possession but partnership. Not belonging to someone but belonging with someone. Not learning that Bella was Dante's, but learning that they were each other's, that they'd chosen and kept choosing each other through everything. Let them watch indeed. Let them see what real love looked like when it was built on honesty, effort, and unwavering commitment to growing together. Let them see family created from impossible circumstances, proving that your beginning didn't have to determine your ending. Let them see that sometimes the most beautiful love stories started in the darkest places, with the most unlikely people in the most complicated circumstances, and still managed to bloom into something extraordinary. As Bella drifted toward sleep in Dante's arms, she thought about the young woman who'd walked into that restaurant 5 years ago, terrified and alone and convinced she was facing a monster. She wished she could tell that young woman what was coming, that the monster would become the love of her life, that the nightmare would transform into a dream she'd never dared to hope for. But perhaps it was better that she hadn't known, that she'd had to discover it step by step, building trust and love gradually rather than being promised a happy ending she might not have believed was possible. The darkness outside their window held no fear anymore, only possibility. Tomorrow the sun would rise on their family, on their love, on the future they continued building together. And that was more than enough. That was everything.